Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Julia Geistberger. I work for AUSSDA, the Austrian Social Science Data Archive at the University of Vienna. And AUSSDA is a member of CESSDA, the consortium of European Social Science Data Archive. This is why we host this webinar via CESSDA. And I am organizing this webinar series as a part of the Infra4NextGen project. You will hear more about that later. And in today's webinar, you will hear about evidence-based policymaking and data-driven insights for a green, digital, healthy, strong, and equal Europe. The session is taught by me and by my colleague Lisa Hirsch. Maybe Lisa, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Lisa Hirsch. I also work for the Austrian Social Science Data Archive, as is evident by the fact that I'm sitting right next to Julia. So we have to be a bit mindful about our microphones, and please bear with us with that. And I am also hosting some other events in the Infra4NextGen project. So you might have come across the hackathons as well. I'm responsible for those. And we will also talk a bit about the results of the last hackathon today. So this is why we are here.
Thank you, Lisa. And we also have some invited speakers today, which we're very happy about. They are Jakub Adamski, Sharon Baltazar, Karl Svanjo, and Niklas Ippisch, who will hopefully also join us in a bit. And they will present the results from the recent Infra4NextGen Hackathon. So what are we going to do in this next hour? First, I will give a quick introduction on the Next Generation EU program. Then we'll talk about why we need data-driven insights, how we get data-driven insights, and what data we can use for data-driven insights. Then the speakers will present the best results from the hackathon, and we'll wrap up by some hints about communicating research results effectively. And of course, we'll have some time planned for questions and answers. So a little framework for our project and the research data that it collects and connects. So Next Generation EU is a recovery plan that was launched after the COVID-19 pandemic to handle the social and economic consequences of the pandemic and to boost European economy in a green, inclusive, and resilient way. It is a total investment of 806 billion euros by the European Commission. And this amount is distributed to various individual regional projects in the member states and also to bigger projects across the member states, such as Infra4NextGen. The instrument to channel these funds is the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and as I said, the focus is on green transformation and green transition and digital transformation. Since all of this sounds a bit abstract, I have some examples here for projects that have been realized with these Next Generation EU funding. So it goes from enhancing the firefighting resources in rural Portugal to helping persons with disabilities gain more independence in Italy. These are examples for the local projects, and our project Infra4NextGen is a cross-national project. It's an infrastructure project that's The aim is to consolidate key social science research infrastructures in Europe and make them more usable for researchers, but also for citizens and policymakers. And it also aims to provide policy-tailored outputs of social science data and data summaries. It's coordinated by the European Social Survey, ESS, and 3 core research infrastructures, CESSDA, the European Value Study, and the Gender and Generations Program. And many more institutions and universities are involved. And it aims to lay a foundation for policies along the 5 themes of the NextGenEU program. So these 5 themes are: make it green, make it digital, make it healthy, make it strong, and make it equal. And Infra4NextGen data should be the base for policies along these themes. And Lisa will now explain how to get there. So she will talk about why we need data-driven insights, how we get data-driven insights, and what data you and we all can use.
All right, so when we start out, we will talk about evidence-based policymaking for the next few minutes. So the first question that I want to give right back to you is, what is actually evidence? And I will create a whiteboard for you that you can write in. And the main question is, what is evidence? So you can go ahead and write down your ideas, what evidence is. Okay, I still see some typing happening, so I will wait for that. So far we have words like proof, hint, information. There's something about validity there. Then we are getting somewhere along the empirical line. So empirics also matter for evidence. So I think you're all on kind of the same track, what evidence is. Okay, so we have data now as well. So there is some kind of basis for evidence. You also added the word facts, which hints to some kind of like observable truth. Robustness is also something that you mentioned now. So that is kind of that results hold up under different specifications. And then you also mentioned that data is something that reflects a social reality. Okay. Thank you for all your input and all your thoughts on that. Please keep all those answers in mind. So, what is evidence? In order to explain what evidence is, it's also important to keep in mind what research is. And I think you all have preconceived notions about what defines research, what research is, what you do basically. But I would like to kind of take a step back and look at a definition that Langer et al. Brought to the table, where research is defined as a systematic investigative process employed to increase or revise current knowledge. And that is one way to think about research. And in that train of thought, evidence is the result of that process. So the idea here is that this knowledge is real in a way, and that insights that we can gain from a research process that is a systematic kind of investigation, that these are actually meaningful. And when you go a bit deeper into that debate, you will very soon come across these kind of realist, more positivist perspective of thinking versus a constructivist one. But for now and for the time being, especially in this webinar, when we talk about evidence-based policymaking, we kind of do assume that there is a way to measure social realities that then allows us to build policies on that. So when we talk about evidence-based policymaking, the question is, are these evidence-based policies actually better than other policies? And when you think about how policies are developed in political systems, often policies are based on ideology, which is not evidence-based by definition. So the question is, what do we actually gain by having evidence-based policies? And there, the perspective exists that evidence-based policies, in a way, are more democratic than ideological policies. So Parkhurst argues that when pieces of evidence are built within decision-making processes, these decision-making processes become more representative of and more accountable to the populations that are actually affected by these policies. So an example that you could think about is that evidence-based policy making allows policymakers to challenge, to address current challenges, for example, climate change. And with policies addressing climate change, it is really obvious that large populations are affected by them, and thus their public opinion and the outcome of these policies for these individual populations also matter. And when we think about how evidence contributes to policymaking, there's two different strands there. So on one hand, evidence can help develop new policies and can help identify societal groups that have been underserved. And then evidence shows that this disparity exists and that those groups should receive more care, more monetary support. But it is also a way to evaluate existing policies. So evidence can also can not just identify a new gap that no one has noticed so far, but also evaluate existing structures and the status quo. So on the European level, there is a few different initiatives already that build on evidence in order to gauge the impact of policies. The European Parliamentary Research Service offers publications and a what they call the European Parliament think tank, where there's a few different researchers adding information on policy briefs. There's the Knowledge for Policy Center, or platform, that is a platform that collects policy briefs by different researchers across Europe on a variety of different topics. And the Joint Research Center of the European Union, the JRC, is an institution that offers not only policy briefs for policymakers to read, but also offers support for researchers who are interested in getting it more into the policy recommendation field of things. And the GRC focuses on how researchers can go beyond science communication, so how results can effectively be communicated to a non-scientific audience. It also puts its effort into localizing research, so that researchers can kind of give insights into structures that they know best. There's a lot about the strategic impact of research and then policy recommendations. And it also offers interactive support for researchers who actually want to go down that road. And now probably you're asking, but how do I actually do policy recommendations? How do I actually do evidence-based policymaking? And the idea here is that, first of all, we need thorough social science research. We need a research question that identifies a gap. That gap doesn't necessarily have to be a traditional gap in the research literature, like you probably know already. And that comes to your mind most readily when you think about what makes a research question great. But it can also identify a relationship that has been overlooked or that kind of needs to be addressed in the grand scheme of things. There's also the aspect that thorough social science research should be methodologically sound. And that can be either quantitative or qualitative, but that there's theoretical backing there as well. And then the communication aspect should be short, concise, tailored to the non-scientific community as well. So when you think about how you communicate your research results, you usually communicate them to peers, other researchers who know the literature, know a lot about statistical modeling or about quantitative methods. So it is a way different peer group than when you would communicate your results to the general public and policymakers. And when you put those two things together, you should arrive at a policy brief that can actually be used by policymakers. And there have been a few studies on how well received evidence-based policymaking and policy briefs are by policymakers. And what the OECD found there is that it is important to understand the institutional context of policymakers. So some policymakers come from institutional contexts where trust in science is quite low, for example. Then policy briefs would need to address that as well. And there's also a large variety of skills needed to understand data-driven insights. There's a lot about technical skills that policymakers need to understand results as well. So these are two things to keep in mind when designing policy briefs. And now that we've covered the how to do it, the question is, what can you use to create data-driven insights? And the Infra4NextGen project offers a variety of different data sets. So as the project is led by the ESS is a valuable resource, goes back to 2002, is now in its 11th round, and covers public opinion perceptions across Europe. CRONOS, the cross-national online survey, has been started in 2016 and is now in its 3rd round. The Gender and Generations program, focusing on perceptions of gender roles and generational topics, has been going on since 2004. And the European Value Study, where the first round happened in 1981, so that covers the largest time frame, the largest timeline, is another valuable tool here. And in order to know which questions there are in these different survey programs, we would highly recommend you to check out the data inventory that the Infra4NextGen project developed. And the inventory allows you to scroll through all different data sets And there is a search function where you can look for buzzwords or keywords, and it searches through the variable names, the questions that are being asked, and also response items. So it allows you to really thoroughly look for the exact question that you want to answer. And what we will focus on today is CRONOS 3. So it's the Cross-National Online Survey 3 panel, and it contains of 5 waves. And there's 18 questions per wave for each of the 5 pillars that Julia mentioned before. And in total, so there will be 90 questions across all pillars and all waves. But right now, wave 1 and 2 have been published. Wave 3 to 5 will be published in the upcoming months and years, while the data collection process is still ongoing. And it offers data on 11 European countries that you can see on the map. So there's also a large variety of countries there. And now I would like to take you through the 5 different pillars, so you get an idea about what's actually in the data before the winning entries from the hackathon will show what they did with that data. So in the equal pillar, there's questions, for example, questions that can be answered. One would be, how do perceptions of wealth distribution affect how supportive people are of state policies that redistribute wealth? So there's questions about the beliefs and about the causes and the responsibility for inequalities in order to capture this dimension, whether respondents think that there's systematic injustices or there's individual failings behind the gap between richer and poorer people. And there's also questions on the policy preferences for addressing these inequalities. So whether government intervention in wealth redistribution is warranted or not, and how government in general should address wealth disparities. The next pillar is the Make It Healthy pillar. One research question that could be answered by this pillar, for example, would be how access to affordable care is related to the satisfaction with said care. And there's questions on the work-life balance, living conditions, lifestyle choices in general, but also healthcare access and medication use, how physical and mental health outcomes influence health disparities among different social groups, and how the availability and the affordability of unhealthy products influence, for example, living conditions and healthcare medication use. The next pillar would be the Make It Strong pillar. Here, one interesting research question would be how different mobility programs like Erasmus influence trust in science, for example. And there's questions about education here, so fairness of educational opportunities and motivation to study science and technology would be a big topic. Mobility, as I mentioned, is not mobility in terms of getting around on different transport devices, but mobility in terms of educational mobility within Europe. But also attitudes towards immigrants are covered by this pillar. And then the more classic demographic public opinion questions about the views on family and marriage, political orientations, and trust in institutions, and how people perceive their citizenship to work are also covered by this pillar. Then the fourth pillar, the Make It Digital pillar, that ties directly back into the the Next Generation EU recovery program. So where the idea is that it should foster a digital and green transformation in Europe. And that pillar covers, could serve to answer questions like, how do digital skills or how does digital literacy differ across different age groups, and where and how should people be supported in developing their digital skills? So there's questions on digital connectivity and digital skills and the integration of these into lives in different societal groups. And the last pillar is the Make It Green pillar. And here, one question that could, for example, be answered is, does worry about climate change increase the willingness to take communal action? And it covers questions on the public attitudes toward climate change, the willingness to show behavioral changes, and the support for different climate policies. It also covers questions on the perception of responsibility of climate change, and connected to that, how willing are respondents to contribute to climate change mitigation? And how is the fairness of both the impact of climate change, but also the fairness of the mitigation costs that are being paid, whether they are actual monetary costs or costs in the larger sense, how these are distributed.
Okay, so now after you've learned some concepts, let's get practical. Earlier this month, we hosted a hackathon where participants had to analyze data from the CRONOS 3 panel and communicate the results to policymakers in the form of a short policy brief. So we are super happy that the 3 winning teams will now briefly present their results. And you can also have a look at the briefs on the Infra4NextGen website. Maybe, Lisa, you can post the link. Okay, so first I would ask Niklas to present your work on inequality perceptions as a matter of social policy.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, for being allowed to also jump in for Anna, who participated in that brief as well. We had a look on the first of the 5 pillars on the Make It Equal pillar, and we were interested in what has an impact on the support for social policies, especially targeting poorer people. Our starting point was the observation that income inequality is still a vibrant problem in whole Europe, and that our previous research found some associations between the perception of the own income inequality or the income inequality in the country and the support for such policies. So we had a look on that as well and applied binary regressions on the fact whether the people would support social policies towards the poor or not, with the question whether the income inequality in the country increased or decreased over the last 5 years as a key independent variable. And we found very strong associations between those 2 variables, even after controlling for various covariates, for example, income, but also education and gender. And also found that the effect is very robust across countries. When you have a look also on the country level, there is only one country, interestingly, we found to have a negative association between the 2 facts. So where a perceived increased inequality does not lead to a rather increased support. And this was Czechia, and we found that this was the country with the lowest income inequality currently in the sample. So apparently there is a kind of mediating thing going on, indicating more research maybe for you to have a deeper look in there.
Thank you. The next would be Jakub, please, to present your policy brief on Europeans and false online information.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so again, thanks for the invitation. It's great to see you guys again. During the hackathon, me and my colleague Remigiusz Żulicki, we decided to focus on make it digital part of the survey, because we see, especially in the last couple of years, that there is a rise of fake news, and we see how they can impact, for example, election, whether it's parliamentary or presidential elections. So we decided to check the questionnaire for the questions that might relate to this issue. And one question caught our attention. It was the question where a survey asked, to what extent the statement, "I know how to check the truthfulness of the information or content I find on the internet," is true to them. And so we wanted to check what influences the odds of people declaring that that the statement is very true for them. So basically, what makes them think that they are confident in their fact-checking skills. And when we explored the data a little bit, we find what we call the confidence gap. So there is plenty of people who use internet on daily basis and very frequently, either all the time or very often during the day, and then they consist of like 86% of the sample for 11 countries. So there is plenty of these people, but at the same time, there is only around 30% of people who feel confident in their fact-checking skills. So there is a huge gap between people who feel confident and people who actually use the internet very often. And so we decided to check what influences this confidence, right? And of all the 14 variables that we included in our logistical regression model, there are few that become meaningful, and we can divide them into two groups. The first group is focused on other digital skills, and the other group is focused on trust. And for the skills part, it was very important that people, for example, know how to check their privacy settings in social media or in their browser, and it impacted this confidence greatly. But actually, the most impactful factor was the ability to find products and information about products and services online, which indicated for us that people treat fact-checking and security in the internet mostly through the lens of a consumer, right? So in a way that they consume products, they also consume content of the internet in more general sense. So this was the first category of variables that were important, and the other was trust. And for example, trust in scientists, so, and as a proxy, trust in science was impacting this confidence in a positive manner. So with every like degree of this trust, 10% more people, it was more likely by 10% that people will declare this confidence. But on the other hand, general trust in people, in other people, decrease this confidence. So there's a lot to do in terms of awareness raising, like training among people, so they can differentiate the different social rules that are on the internet and how trust works in the internet space. So that's it for now.
Okay, thank you. And that's also what you wrote in the policy recommendation, as I remember. Okay, so next and last winning team would be Sharon and Carlos.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you so much for the experience. I think it was very, very interesting also to work and find how the knowledge has been created within all these groups. And so what did we do? Basically, our The objective of our study was to develop data-driven segmentation of public opinion on climate policies. We wanted to test the comp behavioral model in order to create climate engagement profiles. We also use, for example, an exploratory factor analysis with 3 survey items regarding the capability of individuals, the opportunity that they perceive that they have from governments, and the motivation that they may have in order to engage in certain acceptance of policies or willingness to change behaviors towards the good of the environment. We also estimated logistic odds ratios, which help us to uncover social context and factors that may drive or not support or opposition to 3 particular policies that we found within the CRONOS dataset, which were fuel tax increases, renewable subsidies, and appliance bans. And we found very interesting things and very challenging things that we would love to explore a little bit more in depth in the future. And basically, we found that regarding the engagement levels, we found that the individuals who tend to be more engaged towards the protection of the climate presented lower support for certain policies. We think that it may be due to possible skepticism about implementation and fairness. However, we need to explore a little bit more of that. We also found that financial hardship and rural residency were associated with a stronger support for climate policies. In terms of policy preferences, we found that, for example, increased taxes on fossil fuels often face resistance, particularly from the highly engaged individuals, as I mentioned before. In terms of the policies regarding subsidies for renewable energy, we found that there was more approval among those with lower financial hardship. And regarding the law banning inefficient appliances policies, we found that they appear to be less popular among the highly educated respondents. Regarding demographic influences, we found that, for example, the higher education levels correlated with reduced support for climate policies. This may suggest that educated individuals may have different priorities or concerns regarding climate actions. We would love also to explore that more. And then we ended the study by making some recommendations. Of course, it was a very brief proposal, but we would love to also explore this with more depth. And we thought about employing a 2-stage strategy. First, at a pan-European level strategy, addressing the general support patterns while integrating equitable compensation mechanisms, for example, tax rebates to low-income households, for example. Regarding country-specific strategies, we thought that it would be interesting to develop national profiles using this type of engagement that we made before, in order to tailor policies effectively and empower trusted communicators. And I think this is all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. To wrap that up a bit, here are some points to consider for effectively communicating your research to policymakers. So a policy brief should communicate a policy-relevant question, challenge, or topic. It should summarize the findings in a brief and concise way, and should be to the point. And it might contain policy recommendations. And the jury of the hackathon was very impressed by the quality of the submitted briefs. So I think, yeah, if you have a look at the briefs later, you will get a very good examples of that. And in the further resources at the end of this presentation, we also have included a link for examples to policy briefs and for a template that you can use when you try to make a policy brief. And in general, concerning effective science communication, as Lisa already said, usually you communicate your science to colleagues or to other researchers that might be more aware of all the methodological and technical things in the background. But in general, your communication should always be tailored to the target group. So think about your target group, whether it's ordinary citizens or whether it's politicians or policymakers. So try to understand how much they know about the topic and how much needs to be explained or simplified. And also think about what will catch their attention, because, for example, policymakers get, I don't know how many pages of information each day, and therefore you have to think a little bit about what will catch their attention, how your brief will stand out. What I can recommend you very much is that you have a look at your institution if they offer some science communication training, or if there is a communication or public relations office at your university or your institution that can help you promoting your research results. And then hopefully your research will have an impact on policies. And a little teaser, there will be 2 webinars in November, one on presenting research output to non-academic audiences, and one second one about bridging the gap between social science research and the public. So stay tuned and check our, you will find them on our Infra4NextGen homepage under forthcoming events, I guess after the summer break. Okay, so that would be it from us. And now, do you have any questions, either to us or to the hackathon winners? If not, thanks very much for your interest in this topic, and I hope to see you again in the next events, webinars, hackathons. Thank you.